Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And here we're going to talk about Spine 289, Hoop Dreams, a film by Steve James, Frederic Marx, and Peter Gilbert, 1994. As far as me and the Criterion Collection, I would say about 99% of the films that I have seen and certainly have owned that was the first time I've ever seen them. Not very often I would see them prior to them being on the collection. There are a few that's been the case. The Last Emperor is one of them. Rushmore especially was one of them. But this is another example. In fact, I would say that out of all the Criterion films that have been released thus far, this is the one where I've had the longest relationship with prior to its addition in the collection. I had known about the film for 10 years before it came out on DVD through Criterion. And interestingly enough, there was a PBS broadcast of the film, and because it got a lot of attention and it raised the curiosity, I believe, more of my mother than my father. I think he was also interested in it as well. They recorded it, and that's how I watched it for the longest time. Was a VHS copy of the PBS broadcast. A little quick summary about my home video viewing experience. We didn't have a lot of VHS tapes. There were a few titles that we bought, as proper titles, but there were also a fair number of films that was recorded from TV broadcasts, and these were titles that were of interest either to my parents or maybe even to me or my brother. And we would do it that way. But we didn't have an extensive home video library. And a lot of the and so if we didn't have it at home, we would often rent a title through Blockbuster. But there's only so much that you could rent. And then finally the biggest open came through Netflix, and that's when I really started taking interest in exploring through that, and also just being in college and being around other people and just wanting to see what was made, what's out there, and that's where I began my little cinematic journey. But this is a case where I've known the film for the longest time. Basically what the film is, it's a documentary that looks at two teenagers. They're both African American, both living in Chicago. One lives in Cabrini Green. William Gates lives in Cabrini Green, and Arthur Agee lives in West Garfield Park. And they both have aspirations to play for the NBA. They have a love of basketball, and they also can see this as a way of not only doing something that they love, but also improving their economic standing. They're both recruited by St. Joseph's High School in Westchester to play on their basketball team and go to school there. And this covers their 4 years in high school and all the various things that happened to them. Some expected, and a lot of it not very expected. And this is what makes the film very, very interesting, is that even though this is all documented in real time, and there was no real plan, just except for let's try to cover the 4 years. In fact, initially it was going to be a much shorter film. It was going to be just about, it was going to be more about street basketball and recruiting. It's going to be fairly small, but then it quickly blossomed into this larger project of let's see what happens in 4 years. Let's see if they are getting ever close, if they do ever get closer to their dreams. And as a result, you end up knowing more about them. You learn more about their families. You learn more about their circumstances. It raises a lot of various social issues, education, economics, race, all those things, and it's and also at the same time it's just as entertaining as you find in any feature film, if not better. Actually, in a lot of cases, it even plays out better than a lot of fiction films or fabricated films. It elicits sympathy and empathy. You cheer in their high points. You feel low in their low moments, or you feel for them in their low moments, and I think that is probably the biggest takeaway that I consistently get out of this film is that the individual really does matter, and that life should be worth living to the fullest, and having a dream and having a pursuit does make your life a much better, and it's the way that it can facilitate growth, and that's what I get out of this more than anything else. And yes, I'm aware of all the other things that it brings up, but actually this is a testament of how well the film works, because I think if it was made about the issues that it raises, if it was deliberately constructed to make a point, it would not be as appealing. But a lot of the appeal is how it doesn't force anything on you. You're with both Arthur and William. You're with their families, and you're along for this journey, or what ends up being a journey. But you see them living their lives, and you see where they are. You learn a little bit about how they started out and a little bit beforehand, and you really in the end you really hope for the best. And then what makes it even more interesting is that if you really like the film and you start worrying about what happened to them afterwards, it's just as interesting. It's a way of continuing the project. It's the equivalent of, which I haven't seen. It's the equivalent of Michael Apted's 7 Up documentary. It was something started way back when, where he looks at a group of people at the age of 7, and then the next installment was them at 14, then at 21, then 28. Most recently was 56. Oh yeah, there was 49, and then I think the most recent was 56, or maybe it got up to 63. But the point is that it's this continuing work in progress, where you get to see how things have changed, things have remained the same, and while there wasn't really any direct follow-up to Hoop Dreams, if you are resourceful enough and eager enough, you can find what happened. And actually, I would say that the Criterion release was a way of really filling in some of the things that had happened in back then, the 10 years since its release, including, and actually this is what makes the film interesting. By looking at both William Gates and Arthur Agee, you see, while they live parallel lives, and they had different things happen to them, they've made different choices and had different fortunes, there are some interesting, somewhat intentional, but largely unintentional intersections, or while they they were at different points and they had different things happen to them, they also had some strong similarities. And the big similarity that they had, that both of them had after Hoop Dreams, which is actually very, very unfortunate, is they both had to deal with death, and particularly death with father figures that were very, very close to them, that helped them to become who they are now. In the case of Arthur Agee, it was his father who died in 2004, I believe, and his was especially tragic, since he was in the film. You see him more indirectly, but you see him struggle with various petty crimes, and also there's also drug abuse, and in the middle of that he does come clean and starts to take seriously the road to recovery, and to generally reform his life for not only for the sake of himself, but also to be more supportive of his family, to actually be a stronger presence in his family. And he died in 2004, and I believe he was killed. Was the result. And Arthur took it really, really hard when that happened. And then for William Gates, it was his older brother Curtis, who really was a father figure to him, and an important basketball mentor. And interestingly enough, the day he was shot was September 10th, 2001. And so, yeah, eesh. But at any rate, but the reason why I get into all these details is because I genuinely like the film, and I think a lot of it was because I myself understood the importance of having a dream, or the advantages of having a dream and having a pursuit, and that's really how I see it. And thankfully, I can anticipate this becoming an issue. Is like, well, what do you care about it? I mean, you're white, you're male, you presumably grew up middle class, and yeah, I did. I have a middle class, almost upper middle class upbringing. So that's a given for you. Well, for starters, my dream is really a tall order, and it really doesn't matter what the surface attributes are. Pursuing a creative career is a lot of work, and yes, it's harder for some comparatively than others, but typically it's a very, very tough pursuit. And so I understand, and I'm still struggling, and I'm still trying to make this work. And so I understand the long haul and the long road, and there's setbacks and things you never anticipated, and things that come in your way, and I get all of that. And that is universal. It shouldn't depend on any of those factors. In fact, that really, really irritates me when the emphasis is often placed on the distinctions, and usually on very superficial distinctions, because really it shouldn't matter. It should not matter. If it did matter, it wouldn't have had... If it ultimately doesn't matter, if there is no such thing as a universal human experience or whatnot, then this would not have had the appeal that it had. And a lot of what it has the appeal is that this is something that anybody can understand. It's, if you've ever had any kind of dream, and by the way, this is also coming from somebody who really does not care about sports at all. And yes, I know where I live, but or what city is nearby. I don't care about sports, but this is great. But this is a great film, and because it is about that pursuit of a dream and wanting to not just a specific dream, but just in general the the desire to have tomorrow be better than today. So it's very, very broad. It doesn't necessarily have to be wanting to play in the NBA or wanting to do this or wanting to achieve that. It's basically you want tomorrow to be better than today and to be better than yesterday. And that's what this is. And the other thing I really liked about it is that this is if you think about it, it is a coming of age story. These are about when you see them in the beginning, they're both 14 years old, and they act like 14-year-olds do. Kind of wide-eyed, kind of naive, having some kind of burning desire, and then over the course of 4 to 5 years, a lot of shit happens, and there's even some moments where you have to man up and take things like a man and to assert yourself, and both of them go through that in different ways, but at the same time in very similar ways, and that's what I like about it. Is there's a paradox in humanity, and this is why I feel very strongly about Christianity as well. This is in relation to the doctrine of the Trinity. What I love about the doctrine of the Trinity is that it shows it reconciles two seemingly extremes. You can go ultra individual or ultra communal to the point where where one excludes the other. But the doctrine of Trinity brings it together. It's not just the individual, but it's also not just the community, and so on. So it's both. So it's 1 and 3 and 1. That's in the terms of the Trinity. But that idea can extend to humanity, where in human beings we are all individuals. We have our distinct personalities. We have our strengths. We have our weaknesses. We have our talents. We have our ambitions and circumstances that make us unique. But we all, at the same time, we are never really alone, and that we may suffer. We may go through hardships. We may go through particular hardships, but we're never really alone. And we all share in this common essence and nature. It's called humanity, and I think the worthwhile pursuit, the one that is not a waste of time at all, and is there for the betterment of everybody, is to recognize that we are all unique, but we are also all, at the same time, we're also all the same. If you go to one or two extremes, it gets really, really dangerous. If you believe that you are unique and that there's nothing that connects you, then it leads to alienation. It leads to solipsistic thinking, where you just kind of live in your own bubble and then it's just all shelter. But if you believe that we're all the same, then it dilutes. It leads to conformity and so forth. And then there's even the real an equally dangerous one, where you believe that your individual identity is derived from as being part of a group. Because you share this attribute, you have that circumstances, then you're automatically put into this group. And because you are part of this group, that is how your identity is shaped. And that is especially dangerous and fundamentally demeaning to the individual. You are only viewed because you look like this, you talk like this, you have this as part of your background, and that's not healthy. That's not helpful. That doesn't really help anybody except a select few, and for very dubious reasons. So the point of all of this is this is how I see Hoop Dreams. Other people have seen it. They can talk about other things, but this is my takeaway from Hoop Dreams, and it's very, very worthwhile, as certainly as a documentary, and even just as a general film. This was most famously hailed by both Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert as being the best film of 1994, and Roger Ebert took it further at the right moment, and he even called it the best film of the 1990s. Now, I have to say it's really interesting if you know anything about both Siskel and Ebert. 1994 was a very interesting year for them in reviewing films, because they both talked about the best film of the year, where they were in agreement of considering the best film, and that was Hoop Dreams. They were also in agreement, and very strongly, I might add, of another film that ended up being the worst for them of the year, and that was North. Where this is the one where Roger Ebert said in his written review, he said, "I hated this film, hated it." So there you go. It truly was for them the best of times and the worst of times, all in the same year, 1994. So it's very obvious. Go for the best one, not the worst. Just read that review and watch the Nostalgia Critic review of North, and that's all you really need to know about that film. But really, this is all about the best of films. So definitely go for Hoop Dreams. It lives up to that reputation. It's very well deserved, and yes, it was definitely a sham that it was not recognized properly by the Academy, either as a best documentary or even as best picture. And in fact, both Siskel and Ebert, through their show, really wanted this to be nominated as best picture, and because really the category is best picture. It doesn't necessarily have to be fiction, and they see this as a picture, and it's the best picture, certainly to them, and for a lot of other critics and just audiences in general. It was certainly a great picture. It has a lot of things that a lot of people would expect to see from a picture. You have emotion, you have drama, you have people you can feel a connection. It makes you think about things. It opens your eyes to certain things. It does all these things that you would expect, in general, a film to do, and it does that really, really well. And so for that, it should have been recognized as the best picture as well, and not limited to just being a document. Oh, it's just a mere documentary. But I'm glad that, but even with that, it did very, very well at the time. And also from a filmmaking standpoint, it helped pave the way for recognizing that video is not a bad medium to do filmmaking. Video up to that point had this notorious reputation, and it all had to do with resolution. Video, you can only do so much with video compared to film. But this was all shot on video, a few different formats, but most especially Beta and Beta SP, and it's recognized as a very important work, and you could even go so far as to call it one of the greatest films ever made. and all shot on video. So no longer you don't have to view video as just, oh, it's just a crappy format. It's just all used for porn and news footage and everything. That you can make something that's really, really gripping. And in a way, it's also a kind of carryover of the verite tradition. And it does feel like more like it feels less like a documentary. I mean, even though it clearly documents something that happens, and so it definitely lives up to that word. But a lot of it feels very cinematic. You have scenes, you have a string of dramatic situations. The only thing is that they weren't planned out ahead of time. These were things that were being filmed, they were being shot as they were happening. And it makes it completely unexpected in a certain respect. And the interesting thing is that there are some things where you expect, if this had been fictionalized, or if you've done a fiction film, there would have been some cliches, like the guy making the decisive throw shots. That doesn't happen. Mild spoiler, but really, you should go see the film anyway. So, if you haven't already, but yeah, it's played out as cinematic, but at the same time, it's also very real, very natural. It happens with very little interference. The moment just plays itself out. And in that sense, it's a nice carryover of the verite tradition. So I think something that Jean Roche would have been very pleased with in that result. And speaking of Roche, there is also that social commentary element, which again is very subdued, and it comes from the story. It's not that the filmmakers had an agenda or had a point that they wanted to make. In fact, in their commentary track, they said that they're not really polemic filmmakers. They're not Michael Moore. Thank God. If they were, it would have been very limiting. It certainly wouldn't have had the appeal, and it also wouldn't have had the diversity of responses, because there are some people that will respond to it, and if they think about social issues and they think about it in terms of politics, they will see it in those terms, and they will talk about it in those terms. Whereas other people who may not be as interested in politics will see something else, and that's what makes it so great. Is to generate that. Even though we're all talking about the same thing, it elicits so many different responses. And again, this is why I say that when you explore cinema, you end up learning more about yourself than you do the actual film in the end. So yes, it stands to reason that this gets my high recommendation if you haven't seen it. And if you haven't seen it, go see it. It's really wonderful, and in a way, I'm also curious of and if you have seen this before, I am actually interested in what you get out of it, because again, this is my take on it. This whole series that I'm doing is all about my own. In the end, it's all about my impressions of these films. This is what I take from it. This is what I notice. This is what I find particularly interesting. I'm really genuinely curious about what your takes on it are. And I hope that it's serious. It's not just, I would prefer not pithy statements or not just stock video responses. Really put some effort into it. And try to be sincere and try to be cordial. Don't be stupid. I don't tolerate that. I don't like stupid. But I am genuinely curious about what you honestly think about not just this film, but any of the films that I've covered already or will continue to cover in this series. So yeah, if you haven't seen this, go see it. And I don't think you'll be you'll be disappointed. And even with something that runs for almost 3 hours, it never there isn't a dull moment. There isn't a moment where it moves at the right pace. You get the everything just works really, really well for it. And considering that this was a 5-year project, they had 250 hours of footage to deal with, and they were able to make a nearly 3-hour film. In fact, there was a recognition from the Academy, and it was recognized for editing. It was nominated for Best Editing, which Siskel famously pointed out that is actually the best compliment you can have, that you can give to a film, for its if a film ends up being nearly 3 hours and it's recognized for editing, then that's actually a compliment. It doesn't mean that it's too long or too self-indulgent. That it's a justifiable length, and it's a length that works with the material and the subject. So yeah, Hoop Dreams. And until next time, take care.